Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and today I wanted to have a chat about Jane Austen's novels and go through her novels in order from my least favourite to my favourite. Now I have done a full Jane Austen Author Week before, but that was about 2.5 years ago, so I will link that down below, but I thought as that was so long ago I would do effectively a very, very condensed Author Week today in one video and talk about Jane Austen's amazing books. So I am going to be including Jane Austen's novella Lady Susan in this because I love that novella a lot. It's about, I think, 25,000 words, 30,000 words. It's not that long, but it is incredible and I love it, and I think it's very underrated, so I did want to include it in this list as I did with the original Jane Austen Author Week. I'm pretty sure my order from least favourite to favourite is the same as when I made the Jane Austen Author Week 2.5 years ago, because the only book I have reread since then is Pride and Prejudice, and that's positioned in the list is never changing, so let's go. Let's talk about Jane Austen's great books. At number 7, my least favourite Jane Austen novel is Sense and Sensibility. I do love this book a lot. Like I should say, I think like every Jane Austen book is a 5-star read for me, but I just don't think it's as perfect as her other books. Sense and Sensibility follows two sisters, Eleanor and Marianne. They also have a younger sister, Margaret, but Margaret isn't really present in this book. And these sisters are the second family of their father. So he was married before and had a son, and then his wife died and he remarried and had 3 daughters. And on the death of their father, their elder half-brother inherits all the property, and the sisters and their mother are forced to leave, and they have to move out into a cottage and live somewhere else where people don't know them and in very, very reduced circumstances in comparison to their previous life. And the book basically follows the romantic experiences of these two sisters, as well as their relationship and their relationship with their mother and various relations. Eleanor is very sensible, hence the sense in the title, and Marianne is very emotional, hence the sensibility in the title. There are a lot of things that I love about Sense and Sensibility. I really enjoy the sisterly dynamic, and I also think Marianne's plotline is really, really brilliant. I love Marianne's plotline and like the Willoughby stuff. Willoughby is very, very, very brilliantly done. There are a lot of Willoughby-esque characters who turn up in various Jane Austen novels, but in many ways I think that Willoughby is the most effective because I think he is the most human and the one that feels the most realised. One of the reasons why this book is not higher up this list and is my least favourite Jane Austen is because I feel like Eleanor's plotline is slightly less well developed, and Eleanor and Edward's relationship for me just doesn't quite hold the impact that some of the other relationships do in other Jane Austen books. And also Margaret, the like lonely third sister who's never mentioned. I'm confused as to why she is there, but also not there. But there we go. Basically, I don't think it's as perfect as Jane Austen's other books, but I do love it a great deal. And I think especially if you're interested in looking at like sisterly relationships and two very, very different sisters and how they change each other, definitely one to read. Next up, Northanger Abbey. I really, really enjoy this one, like I do with all of Jane Austen's books. It follows Catherine Morland, who is from a large family living a fairly sheltered life when she gets taken away by some family friends to the very exciting, glamorous place of Bath, where she gets involved in society, doesn't really know quite what's going on, and makes various different friends, including with a family called the Thorpes and a family called the Tilneys. And Catherine is rather a fan of the Gothic novel and keeps imagining tropes from Gothic novels turning up in her real life, such as imagining that people may be vampires and murderers when they are not, etc. It's good fun, it mocks Gothic in a great way, and the love story is really, really enjoyable. I think Catherine Morland's a very, very fun and entertaining character. It's not my favourite just because I don't think I love it as much as the others, rather than because I love it less, if you see what I mean. But it's still a great read, and especially if you're interested in kind of Gothic literature across the late 18th and 19th century, it's definitely worth reading. Next up is Emma, which is one I definitely recommend. It is quite a few people's favourite Jane Austen, and I do really understand why. We follow a young woman called Emma who is, as we are told in the first few pages of the book, handsome, clever and rich. Emma Woodhouse lives with her father. She has an awful lot of money, she has no desire to marry, but what she does like doing is matching up all of her friends with different people. She is interfering, she is vain, and she is careless of the feelings of others and rather selfish, but also she is a little bit charming too. And the book follows her relationship with various people around her, including her father, her friend Harriet, her sister's husband's brother, Mr. Knightley, and various other people. I really like Emma's character trajectory over the course of the book. That's one of the things I really like about this. I don't find it quite as engaging as some of Austen's other books, but Emma as a character is really great, and also Mr. Knightley is one of my favourite male leads in a Jane Austen book. I think he's a really, really well done and interesting character, and yeah, a great one. Next up we have Persuasion. Like, my top 4 are all like absolutely incredibly brilliant. Obviously the last 3 I just mentioned also incredibly brilliant, but these 4 are like superbly brilliant. Persuasion is a really, really lovely book. Again, another one that I think is a lot of people's favourite, and I do understand why. Anne Elliot is 28 years old, which for the Regency period is really getting on past it. And I realised the other day that now, reading Jane Austen, all of Jane Austen's heroines, except for Anne Elliot, are younger than me, and I was like, oh, that makes me feel old now, but it's okay because I don't live in the Regency period, so it's fine. Anyway, in Persuasion, we follow Anne Elliot. She is 28 years old. She is sensible and quiet in a family of people who are not sensible and not quiet and who like to spend all their money, and because her father, a baronet, has spent all his money, they have to move to Bath, which Anne Elliot does not like. Now, 8 years earlier, Anne was engaged to a young man called Frederick Wentworth, but her godmother, Lady Russell, persuaded her to break off the engagement, saying that Frederick Wentworth did not have enough prospects in life. Anne has not seen this man for 8 years, in which she has not married, but at the end of 8 years, Frederick Wentworth comes back from abroad and she meets him again. And this book is about many things. It's about second chances, and it's about feeling the world has slipped past you, and it's also about feeling out of place in your family, which I'll talk about a bit later in Mansfield Park as well. But Anne certainly doesn't really feel part of her family, and a lot of her family don't really understand her. I love Anne as a character. In fact, I love Frederick Wentworth too. It's a really, really beautiful book. A little bit quieter and less funny than some of her other novels, but absolutely incredible. And yeah, you should definitely read it. But you should read everything by Jane Austen, so yes. From a quieter Jane Austen novel to a novel of incredible humour, I want to mention Lady Susan, my third favourite Jane Austen, which I have in this edition along with some of her juvenilia. I adore Lady Susan so much. Lady Susan is an epistolary novella that Jane Austen wrote while living in Bath, but it wasn't published until after her death. And in some ways you can understand why, because it feels a little bit not exactly wilder than the rest of her novels, but a little bit more scandalous in some ways. It is told in the form of letters, which is something I really enjoy, especially as you get to see in different letters a lot of characters being very, very two-faced with each other and the people around them. Imagine a book in which the main character is a bit like Mary Crawford crossed with Caroline Bingley, but older, with more power, and meaner, but also funnier. It's so good, it's so good. It's very, very entertaining, and I love it. I've heard other people say that it's slightly less polished than the rest of her novels, but in a way I don't care, because I think it's so ruthlessly funny, and because it wasn't published at the time, I do think you can see that there is a little bit less restraint in some ways in that, which is something I quite enjoy. It's really, really good fun, and I would really, really highly, highly recommend it. And also it won't take you very long, so what's to stop for you? Very underrated and very brilliant. My second favourite Jane Austen book is Mansfield Park, which I absolutely love. As I mentioned in another video recently, I feel like while Pride and Prejudice, my favourite Jane Austen book, spoilers, is the Jane Austen book I enjoy the most, I feel like Mansfield Park is actually the one I find the most interesting in a weird way. The first time I ever read this book, I did not like it, and then I studied it at university several years later and was blown away by how much that experience changed me and how much I loved it. Mansfield Park follows a young woman called Fanny Price. She comes from a kind of lower middle class family who don't have very much money, and so she is sent to live with her wealthy relations instead to bring her up, and she always feels downtrodden and oppressed within this family, most of whom look down on her, apart from her cousin Edmund, who is her friend. And the book follows Fanny's kind of growing up, her relationship with her family, and also with two new young people who come into the neighbourhood called Henry and Mary Crawford, who are amazing. Like, the Crawfords, they're two of my favourite characters in the whole of Jane Austen. They are amazing, amazing characters, as is Fanny. Now, a lot of people think Fanny Price is boring, but personally, I think Fanny Price is one of the most interesting characters in the whole of Jane Austen. She is quiet and reserved and internal, and she doesn't speak very much, but she has a lot of moral strength, a lot of moral character. She really has a backbone for someone who is so quiet and considered so meek by everyone around her. And also, it's really interesting, if you look at Jane Austen's novels, most of her novels are about character development and character change. Like, in a lot of her books, the main character has to go through some kind of learning curve in order to kind of succeed in life. And the exception, I would say, is to an extent Persuasion and also Mansfield Park, where Fanny does not change because she's like already herself and knows herself and is kind of awesome from the beginning. I love Mansfield Park a lot. It's also really, really interesting in terms of looking at issues of morality and decorum and what was considered right or wrong. You know, like in this book, the young people try and put on an amateur dramatics performance, and that's like super scandalous. Like, that's really, really not okay within early 19th century society. And there's so many interesting things in this book, kind of historically in that sense. It's absolutely fantastic and I would really, really recommend it. And if you've read it once and didn't like it, please do give it a second chance. I don't think it's as immediately like funny and exciting and enjoyable as other Jane Austen novels, but like the more you read it and the closer you look into it, the more fascinating and wonderful and brilliant and incredible it is, and I love it. So yes. Also, I suppose another reason why I think it's not everyone's favourite is because the love story is less compelling, but like that's not what I'm here for in this. I'm here for like Fanny's character and her steadfastness and the way the book looks at kind of feeling like an outcast, feeling like an outsider within your own family, feeling like people don't understand you, and kind of conquering that as well. And it's great, it's so great, it's so great, yes. But my favourite Jane Austen novel is Pride and Prejudice, because I think there are very few books that can match this for me in terms of sheer enjoyment. I just love this book an awful, awful lot. A lot of people know the story, but it follows a young woman called Lizzie Bennet. She is one of 5 sisters, and her father's estate is entailed on the male line, which means that none of them will inherit it. All of them, if they want to have any hope of remaining in the sphere in which they have been brought up, need to marry fairly wealthy men. And it chiefly focuses on the elder 2 sisters, Jane and Lizzie, and their relationships with men and the world around them. And of course, there is Mr. Bingley, and there is Mr. Darcy, and there is Mr. Wickham and Mr. Collins, and a lot of great characters. I like the nasty and the silly characters in this almost best. Miss Bingley is a glorious, glorious character, and Mr. Collins will never fail to make me laugh. I find this book hilarious, like absolutely hilarious. I'm listening to the audiobook at the moment and I'm just like laughing to myself walking along on the street and people give me weird looks and I do not care because it is so great. It's also just heartwarming and wonderful, but it's also really fascinating in terms of looking at the social customs of the time, in terms of looking at themes of family and money and inheritance and the position of women within early 19th century society and the restrictions of women in many ways, especially if we look at characters like Charlotte Lucas and the choices they make because of the lack of independence they have. It's so, so interesting and so, so amazing, and yes, brilliant. So there we have it. As brief a go through as I could of Jane Austen's amazing books. I think she is a wonderful, wonderful author, and if you haven't read her yet, I would urge you to pick up some of her books, and if you haven't read all of her books yet, I would recommend you carry on, and if you have read her 6 novels but you haven't read Lady Susan, please, 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 it's so, so good. It really, really is. So there we have it. That is everything I wanted to say today. Please let me know down in the comments what your favourite Jane Austen book is. I would love to know. I would find that absolutely fascinating. I wanted to make a poll on Twitter. Twitter only lets you have 4 choices in your polls, which is ridiculous, so there we go. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.